Good morning. I want to talk to you all today about a topic that I think is relevant to everybody in this room, and that is being number one, being the first choice. And we're going to see that in so many walks of life, being number one is really, really crucial. Now, for those of you that are golfers or who like golf, I like this quote by the famous golfer Gary Player. And he said, "I'm tired of these golfers who are happy with being in second place. The only one who will like you if you're in second place is your wife and your dog, and that's only if you have a nice wife and a nice dog." And I think that really sums it up very, very well. Being second place is really not what we want to do. Let me tell you a sad story of number two, and this is a true story. Some years ago, I had a doctoral student, and she was great. She was brilliant. And when she finished her PhD and she went out on the job market to interview for professor jobs, she was nearly at the top of everyone's list. All the greatest schools wanted to interview her. The problem is, believe it or not, she came in number two at every school she interviewed. She came in number two. And guess what happened? She didn't get a job that year. Even though she was high on everyone's list, she wasn't quite good enough to beat out that number one. So we can see that even though we like to say when you're number two, you try harder, being number two is just not enough. And so your objective is to be the first choice, to be the first choice. And we have to remember everything that we do is a choice. Everything we do is a choice. So if you're trying to make someone a leader of your team or of your organization, that's a choice. If you're trying to decide which company you want to go to work for, hopefully you'll have choices. If you want to prepare for change in an organization, that's a hard choice. Buying one brand over others, that's always a choice. Even responding to a request on a dating site, that's a choice that you have to make. So everything is a choice, and we have to remember that whenever we're confronted with a choice is a problem. A choice presents a problem. Now, it may be a happy problem. We may like the outcome, but we have to think of it as a problem to be solved. So the question is, how do we as humans solve problems? Now, some people, some economists, for example, like to tell us that we are very much like robots. That is, we are very passive decision makers. We collect data from the outside world. We process it very coldly and rationally, and we always make a decision that's in our best interest. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not the way that I often make decisions, and I don't think that most of us do. The real world doesn't work that way. And unfortunately, for example, when we're confronted with a choice between a healthy alternative and a not healthy but really, really tasty alternative, I know which one I'm going to go for. That's not rational, but that's a choice that I made. So think about your own life. Think if you've ever asked yourself one of these questions. How do I convince my team that I made the choice that's best for them? How in the world did I pick this toxic place to work for? What genius selected this really lame strategic option for us, for our company? On what planet is this the best brand? Or even, what was I thinking when I decided to go out with him or with her? So these are all choices that we've made, and after the fact, they may not seem to make much sense, but I can assure you that there is a method to your madness. There is a reason why people make these choices, even though they seem irrational to us. The problem is that it's not always obvious why they made those choices. And there are often very subtle factors going on, either in the environment or in our own personal history, that bias us in one direction or another. So let me give you a few examples. Context matters. In other words, the environment in which we make a choice often has a very big impact on what our choice is, even when we are unaware, totally oblivious to the influence that that environment had on our decision making. Let me share a few examples with you that I think are kind of interesting. One you may have heard of, it's the so-called name-letter effect. And this has been documented in a variety of studies. People prefer things that start with the same letter as their names. And so when we look statistically, what we see, for example, that if your name is Dennis, statistically speaking, you're more likely to be a dentist. And if your name is Laura, you're more likely to be a lawyer than the other way around. Now, when you ask someone why did they choose to be a dentist, I doubt that they would give you that explanation. This is a great study that was done a few years ago. So people are sitting in a room, and they're going to be asked to solve a problem. And in one condition of this study, there is a very small but noticeable IBM logo on the wall. And in another condition of the study, everything is exactly the same. The only difference is that there is an Apple logo on the wall. Guess what? The people who sat in the room with the Apple logo came up with more creative solutions to the problems that they were given, as rated by outsiders, than did the people who were looking at the IBM logo. But neither group, when they were asked to account for why they came up with these solutions, said anything about a logo that might have influenced them. They had no idea that that was operating. Here's another one. People were asked to rate a variety of products in two kinds of rooms. In one room, they stood on a cold, tiled floor. And in the other room, in the other condition of the study, they stood on a carpeted floor. Everything else was the same. They rated the same products. But guess what happened? The people who stood on the cold, tiled floor actually rated the products as colder and less desirable than did the people who stood on the carpeting. Again, after the fact, asked them, why did you rate that product that way? Not a single person said, well, it had to do with the floor that I was standing on. Here's another study that I love. Two groups of students are given an exam to take, and they're all given identical pencils to take the exam with. The only difference is that students in one group get a pencil that has the logo of MIT embossed on the pencil. Guess what happened? The students in this condition of the experiment actually scored better on the exam than did students who took the exam with a regular pencil. So maybe there's a little lesson there for you next time you have to take an exam. I'm not sure. But all these examples show us so much for rational decision making. None of these decisions seem very rational. And yet in each case we can see that lurking in the background, in fact, there was an explanation. It's just that we weren't aware of it at the time. So we have to ask ourselves, what drives our choices? And there's not a simple answer, but there are many answers available when you turn to the social sciences, when you turn to psychology and economics, sociology, anthropology, and so on. So let me give you a few quick examples of how these fields can provide insights to us. When we look at the field of economics, for example, it's well known that people tend to exhibit what economists call loss aversion. And what that simply means is that when we're faced with a choice, we would prefer an option that minimizes our possible losses to a choice that maximizes our possible gains. So people are very risk averse, even though the odds may be the same, or they could actually come out very well if they made the right choice. From the field of neuroscience, we know that our brains kind of construct these structures that we call schemas. And these schemas help us to decide if something that we perceive from the outside world is similar to things that we already know. And based on that determination, we are going to group things into categories. Now that can work out very well and very rationally, except in cases when marketers aren't aware of this and they use the wrong cues. For example, in packaging. So we might use the wrong schema. Here, for example, is a product that failed miserably, even though it worked quite well. So when Maalox decided to package its product, its antacid product, in a package that looked a lot like a can that should deliver whipped cream, people thought it was something that they should put on their dessert. And of course it failed. As another example, this looks like a very refreshing can of beer or some other beverage. Unfortunately, it's radiator coolant, and I wouldn't advise drinking it. So we have perhaps a great product, but because the wrong scheme is being used, we have a failure in the marketplace. In psychology, we talk about learning and how we come to associate some things with others over time. So for example, if we have a logo like the very familiar Marlboro cigarette logo, when we show it to people enough over and over again over the years, they come to learn it very well, and the characteristics of that logo will carry over so that eventually we don't even have to show them the brand name. All we have to do is show them this familiar image, and they will immediately think Marlboro, because that is the connection that they've come to learn over time. When we look at the field of sociology, we can think about expectations in a society and how people are aware of various norms, that is, what is normal to do, and all of the written and unwritten rules that guide our behavior. So, for example, for people who are obsessed with what to wear to a job interview, we see that there are, in fact, lots of do's and don'ts, and people essentially are expecting to see interviewees wearing certain things that are going to classify them the right way. And if we violate those expectations, we better be aware that there are going to be consequences. So all of these are examples of learnings from the social sciences. There are thousands of others, but what they remind us is don't be that number two choice, especially for reasons that you can control. Find the hidden triggers that determine our choices and be the first choice. Thank you very much.